I'm here. Hello.
Morning, Venerable Robina.
Hi, Amy. Thank you, darlings. Happy to see you all. Good. It's a spring evening here in New York, so people are they've been sort of like 1s and 2s and -3 degrees, and suddenly it's about 14 today. So people are out in their summer skirts like they've gone mad, you know. It's very hilarious. But it was pleasant. It's nice. Okay, darlings, here we are. And who's here? So, good. So what's the plan, Amy?
Well, if we may, Venerable Robina, I'd like to begin by offering mandala, and then we're into everyday Buddhism. So
okay, just do one. So just Amy's going to offer a little mandala. This lovely Tibetan, it's great meaning. It's like when you visit someone, you don't go empty-handed. You bring something. You bring a bottle or something. Here we're offering a mandala, which is really just the contents of the universe. Make it short, Amy, a little one.
Okay.
We're kind of offering the content of the universe to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. That's the plan. Okay. You do the mandala first, and then I'll do the refuge.
Okay. I have to do it.
So if you don't know this visualization, if you don't know this one, don't worry, just visualize all the marvelous things of the world that you do know and pile them all up and offer. Make it very kind of experiential.
So this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Perfect, pure, holy gurus, from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharmakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dharma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued, exactly as they need. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Noyatayami.
Okay. So we can do our little prayer, just setting ourselves on the right track. The Tibetans would say, set our motivation. I mean, we might say, what's our purpose? What's our goal? Why are we here together? So that's motivation. So we're thinking the first 2 lines are just expressing our reliance on the Buddha. So for those of us who already do that, we just remind ourselves of our refuge. And the second 2 lines are really saying we're going to listen to these teachings, and that includes me, I promise, so we can take some tools from it to help us develop our own amazing potential, so we can be of help to others, all the way to leading them to enlightenment. Sangye Chodan Soke Chognam La Jantu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gipesonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shog Sangye Chodan Soke Chognam La Jantu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gipesonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shog. So the first one I said was like in English, so that's enough. Okay. So you want me to just talk, say something, everyday Dharma, yeah?
Yes, please. Yes. About how to apply the teachings in everyday situations.
Well, that's the big one, isn't it? I mean, we can be very clever intellectual lot. I think in our modern people, we're super intellectual, super educated. We can get very carried away with ideas. And then it's hard to distinguish between the thoughts and the experience. And I think it's interesting. You know very well, if you're going to practice tennis, you can never mistake theory of tennis with the practice. You can never fool yourself. You know the difference between holding a racket and just talking about it. But the biggest difficulty with something like this, is that because we're so clever, we have such good intellects, and we can be very convinced intellectually, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't underestimate that. But it's only a starting point. We can easily fool ourselves and think that we're practicing, but then, of course, on the other hand, we get a bit depressed when we think, well, I do know it intellectually, but why hasn't it happened yet? And that's also a fault, because the fact of the matter, just like tennis, you can know it all theoretically perfectly, but it takes a really long time to perfect it. So we've really got to have a bit more patience and humility with ourselves. So what's that mean then, practice? I mean, I know when I first heard the teachings from Rinpoche up at Chen Reisig, I really did not have a clue. I mean, we know very well, this Lam Rim, this amazing packaging of Lord Buddha's teachings. If you really put it into your own language, is what Lama Yeshe was so amazing at, put it down to earth language, then you can hear it. But the way, Lama Zopa basically was talking exactly like Tsongkhapa talked in the 14th century. There wouldn't have been a fraction of difference, because they kept it all so intact up there in their mountain, and that's how they think. So it's really it needs a radical digging deep in our mind to try and hear this packaging, this virtually a foreign language, and try to put it into our own words. And that, of course, was the brilliant skill of Lama Yeshe. I mean, I never fail to still be amazed, you know, when I'm editing Lama, his extraordinary skill back then. He was really quite isolated. How he got to talk like a modern Western person, I really do not know, because he had Western students, but it was really quite remarkable, his skill, you know, and that's what we have to learn to do. So, of course, hearing the Lam Rim, and you start to listen to, you know, impermanence, that seems a pretty reasonable thing to put into practice. But then you start hearing about the lower realms and you don't know what the hell they're talking about. What is that? What are they talking about? What am I supposed to do with that, you know? Well, I mean, we know now, and if we know the Lam Rim, there's a logic to it all. But it wasn't evident in the beginning, because our view of what a spiritual practice is and our view of practicing it are very, very different from this, you know. So basically, one way of putting what you're trying to do as a Buddhist, one approach, is you're learning the philosophy. You're learning the theories. You're learning to know what Buddha thinks about the world. So in a very real sense, that's practice. So what does that mean? How do you practice impermanence? How do you practice understanding the different realms of existence? And this is practice, but we're a bit obsessed with the idea of practice being something you do with your eyes closed while you're sitting on your bottom. I mean, it's still like that in the West. We still have this really cliched idea that practice means with your eyes closed, sitting on your bottom, called meditation. It's really naive, you know, because practice is different levels. They talk about developing the wisdom from listening to the teachings, then the wisdom from thinking about those, and then the wisdom of actually experiencing the truth of them. And that indeed is the final one, but you can't leap to that. I mean, the same with music. You can hear musical theory, and you can't just go and play Bach immediately. You've got to squeeze your brain, you know, as Lama puts it. You've got to squeeze your brain and think it through and see the logic of the structure and the theories. That's part of practice. Don't think it's not. So one approach to practice is definitely learning the theories. Nothing wrong with that. You must. So Buddhist teachings on impermanence, I mean, it's fairly evident on the simplest level that things change. But I mean, we have to learn to know what he means by it. So, for example, he'll give there's extensive teachings on gross impermanence and then what he calls subtle impermanence, you know, and just reading about those things, which is indeed theoretical, which is indeed intellectual. Don't think that's not practice. It's really profound to know the difference. But how you know, so there's one way of so the way you apply impermanence in daily life, obviously, is when you confront something you don't want to change and suddenly it's changing. That's when you test it, isn't it? So that's when you apply the simple example of gross impermanence. Guess what, Buddha says? Things break, things change, things die, relationships finish, cups crack. It's the nature of things. It's not some kind of philosophy that he dumped on everything. It's the way things are. So this brings us to one approach to Buddhist practice. He's telling us, and this is profound to know, this is really intellectual, but it's profound to know it. He's basically telling us that we suffer because we've got wrong views in our mind. I mean, that's a pretty intense concept. And to know that theoretically is an incredibly necessary starting point. So then you've got to investigate the mind to see what these wrong views are. I mean, if you take Buddha as your hypothesis, you've got to do that. Well, you know, one of them is impermanence. You know, he's saying we might know intellectually that things change at the grossest level, even forget the subtle level. I mean, understanding the subtle level of impermanence can be confused with emptiness. It's so subtle. So forget that one. But the grosser one, we've got to look at why is it that something that's so evidently true is hard to realize. It's because we are addicted to the mistake. We're addicted to believing, we're addicted to believing that things won't change because we can't bear the thought that they will change, you know. It's the great theories, but then when you start to join the dots and see the relationship, let's say, with attachment. I mean, you know, I always use that example. I mean, I don't mean to be mean about it. Nicole Kidman, I read an article years ago in Vanity Fair when she was still with Tom Cruise. And she said in the article, it was very profound. She said at the end of the article, you know, they'd been in love, they'd been together, hanging out, life was perfect, everything was perfect. In other words, attachment was getting what it wanted. When everything is wonderful and you've got happiness, that's attachment getting what it wants, and that's nothing wrong. It's marvelous. It's what we call getting nice things. Great, she was happy. But the thing is, because when you're really attached to something, you just don't even want to consider the possibility that it might end. So because of this incredible attachment to everything being so beautiful. As she said at the end of the article, I'll never forget, it was very fascinating. She said, we will be together until we are 80. She also said, very next sentence, which I thought was pretty profound too, she said, and if we won't be, I will be devastated. And that's exactly, of course, what happened. I mean, I always joke and say, well, you know, Penelope Cruz came along and took Tom Cruise. I mean, it probably isn't like that, but I'm just joking. So this is, we really can see. So knowing theoretically things change is really good. So how you apply it, the more you study the teachings, the more you study about attachment and then see this deep relationship, then it completely makes sense why when good things change into bad, why it is unbearable. So because we can't stand the thought of something beautiful changing or our life ending or that beautiful cup breaking, then we actually literally, and that's what Buddha is saying, we literally dump onto reality a lie. And that's essentially what Buddha is saying, which is a real eye-opener. To think that you suffer because you don't have the right view, to think you suffer because you're living in la-la land in relation to reality is quite a shock to us. Because we think we suffer because Tom Cruise left us. We think we suffer because the cup broke. No, we suffer because we had a misconception about it, which is called grasping at permanence. So when we really can get this general point that Buddha's making, which I would say is quite unique to the Buddha. I mean, there's lots of this in the West. I mean, cognitive therapists get this idea. Cognitive behavioral therapists say, change your thoughts, you'll change your life. Well, I mean, well done. I'm glad they're catching up with Buddha. He's been telling us this for 2,500 years. He's the expert at it. You know, he didn't make it up, but he's observed it. That's his expertise. So I think the key thing is being a Buddhist, which is not evident initially. You know, you don't hear this initially, that we suffer because what's in our mind is not in sync with how things are. This is a pretty profound point, and that completely covers all of Buddha's teachings. That's a completely simple way of describing practice in Buddhism. Changing your mind. Why should you? Because the views in the mind at the moment, especially the emotional misconceptions like attachment and anger, and they are misconceptions deep in the bones of our being, that have this massive emotional component, that all these misconceptions, these are the source of our suffering. I mean, to hear that and to know that's across the board from here to enlightenment is pretty incredible concept. And then to slowly try to experience the truth of that. I mean, that's so how you put that into practice. Every second is how you do it. Every single second you must. So we've got basically misconceptions in the mind, you know, which is astonishing to hear. And even more astonishing when you think of the emotional ones, how anger is a misconception. It sounds like a joke, you know, because we're so addicted to the emotions. And this is why in the second scope of the teachings, in the Lam Rim, the middle scope, why the main point is to learn to see the suffering that attachment and anger cause us and all the other delusions, you know. So the main emphasis there isn't so much on the fact that they're misconceptions. That's more subtle. It's on the fact that they're disturbing emotions, and that is pretty evident. But when we really can begin to see that, then we can begin to unpack them and realize this profound point that actually that attachment is this emotion of attachment and the emotion of anger, the emotion of jealousy, the emotion of arrogance, the emotion of low self-esteem, and we all know these. They're just the emotional and the physical, because the mind and body are connected, the emotional and physical expression of these misconceptions that we hold deep in the bones of our being, you know. I mean, I just find this really powerful. So how is attachment a misconception? How is anger a misconception? Well, it's kind of evident. I mean, the Lamas tell us all the time, Lama, stop talking about it, you know. Lama Zovinev stops talking about it. We've got to join the dots. Well, it's very obvious, isn't it? That the end result of attachment, and let's look at what drives it inside in a minute, but the end result of attachment, when you meet the cake, when your eye consciousness meets that brown triangle, right, and we label it chocolate cake, we know when there's attachment in the mind, the cake looks way more delicious than it actually is. And we know that from eating it yesterday, that it actually turned into looking something disgusting after I've eaten too much of it. We forget that, and we totally believe this story embedded in our mind, that it is delicious from its own side, and that when I get it, it'll bring me happiness. And then the exaggerating takes place again. We believe it every single time. We keep bashing our heads against brick walls because the habit is so primordial. So when we know this is the point when we have to have patience and humility with ourselves. These habits, I mean, this is why even if you don't understand reincarnation and not sure about it, but just the idea that we come into this life program with habits that are countless lifetimes old, it should make us quite humble to realize these habits are very, 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 very deep, you know. But it's quite hard to see even, because as Lama Zopa says, and I'm never failed to be shocked by this statement, but when you hear it, it's exactly what Buddha's telling us, and it's so true. He says the vast majority of all humans on the planet, please hear these words, he said this, the vast majority of all humans on the planet, and he has to mean what we mean by intelligent ones as well as thick ones, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. So, okay, now, when it comes to being a mathematician, no problems. You know everything in your mind is related to being a mathematician. It plays the central player in you being a mathematician is the mathematical knowledge in your mind. The same with music and all the theory and all the scientific stuff. But Lama Zopa's talking, of course, which is Buddha's expertise, is the emotional one. That's the part that we really don't realize. It's very shocking. I mean, we know you've got to be in touch with reality and proper concepts if you want to be a mathematician or a musician or a scientist or a cook. You've got to have correct theories in your head, then you'll get a cake. You've got to have correct theories in your head, then you can play music. We don't have a problem with that. And we know you can change your mind radically from knowing zero math to being a genius mathematician. But we don't realize that we can change our mind from being totally miserable person to a happy person. Because we don't think our mind plays a role. That's the point that Lama Zopa is making. It's very shocking. In other words, it shows how addicted we are, and that's what Buddha calls samsaric, to the samsaric philosophical view, which is really the view of our culture, is the view of philosophical materialism. I'm not being rude here, it's a fact. The philosophical materialist view says exactly that. You know, that the outside world, your mommy, your daddy, your parents, what happens to you, the good, the bad, they are the things that mold you as a person. They are the things that cause, in fact, your anger, your jealousy, and your depression and your love. So the outside world is mainly what we think is what determines my happiness and suffering. They are what play the role in my life and determine to be what I am. But the Buddha is literally the opposite. He's not saying the things outside don't play a role, but he says we're way over exaggerating their role. We give far more power to the outside world, he says. In fact, the mind, what goes on in the mind, which is our thoughts and feelings and emotions, which basically are our interpretations of the outside world. I mean, we see this every day, but we don't join the dots, you know? I mean, in other words, when you learn to forgive somebody, first of all, you're angry with them. There's a thought in your mind, how dare they do that to me? And their person appears ugly to you, and you're really upset. That's because there's anger in your mind. Your anger determines the way the person appears, and your anger is describing the experience. But then you decide to change your mind. Think about it, and you decide, I shall forgive her. You go through it, you think about it, maybe you talk to them, and then you change your mind. And now what are you doing? You're using your mind to reinterpret that person. You see them differently now. That means you change your mind. So it's clear. So now what's the consequence? The first time you're miserable, now you're happy. What changed? They didn't change. The action didn't change. Nothing changed out there. Your mind changed. So it's sort of obvious, but this is exactly what Buddha's telling us. This is Buddha's expertise. But because we're so addicted to grasping things are permanent, because we're so addicted to exaggerating delicious things and exaggerating ugly things, and that's called anger and all the other emotional neuroses that come as a result, we believe their stories. I mean, as Lama Zopa says, bad enough that the cake appears wrongly to us. In other words, the cake, as Lama Zopa puts it, appears, everything in the outside world appears back to us. And this is what they say, this is, my term is through the lenses, but what they say is appear back to us through the lenses of whatever's in our mind, or as Lama Zopa puts it, which is what they say in the Buddhist psychology, it appears in the aspect of whatever's in our mind. So clearly, if I have my attachment glasses on, the thing will look delicious. If I have my aversion glasses on, the thing will look ugly. So, I mean, this is the point that he's making. It's hardly rocket science. But because we're addicted to believing what attachment and aversion tell us, it's hard to see it. And it's hard to then practice it, of course, because it's just default mode. And we shouldn't put ourselves down for that. Our mind is deeply grooved, deeply programmed to see things in this way. So it takes masses of practice. And indeed, as the Lamas would tell us, purification, which sort of puts atomic bombs under these tendencies, you know. And this is the heart of it. This is the heart of the practice. This is the heart. So then the other level is, of course, the philosophical view, which don't think that's not practice. I mean, all the philosophies, Buddhist philosophy, is a description from Buddha's own direct experience of exactly how the world exists. I mean, it's an amazing, it's like outrageous. He's got a view that completely describes the whole universe, you know, how it exists. He's got, there's a term in science, what's it called? An answer for all, or an answer for everything. What is that term in science? Does anybody know? An answer of everything, or what's it? Does anyone know that term in science? John, have you heard it? There's a term, an answer for everything. As they say it, there's like an answer that'll answer everything.
Theory of everything? Theory of everything.
Theory of everything. I think it's a theory of everything. Well, I'm telling you, you have to believe it. Check it out. That's what Buddhism is. His view of emptiness, which all this leads to emptiness. It's a theory of everything. It's a theory of the entire universe, and not just the humans, but all the planets, all the universe, happiness, suffering, the beginning of universe, and the end of universe. It's not wrong to say it. It's not being arrogant. Buddha backs it up with experience. You know, it's up to us to look into it and find out. Theory of everything. Exactly that. That's exactly. You could say that's exactly what Buddhism is. I mean, you can say that, but then you have to find out for yourself, don't you? You know, Einstein can tell you that too. Jesus can tell you that too. Islam can tell you that too. The Australian Aboriginals will tell you that too. It's okay. Everyone's allowed to tell you what they think. It's up to us to find out, isn't it? That's the point. But that's the point. That's what I think is very interesting when you study the Lamrim initially. Like, and I listened to Lama Zopa back at Chenrezig Institute that year. I'll never forget as long as I live. I'll never forget. Because I didn't understand a word, you know. There were 200 people up there. They just built the new Gompa, and it was the middle of bloody winter. And of course, because they live in Queensland, they always think it's hot. I mean, oh, this is Queensland, they say. There it was in June, and there was this damn new Gompa, and the louver windows hadn't been put in yet, and there were just gales of wind for 1 month coming through this Gompa. I'll never forget as long as I live. I kept thinking, do people think this is Queensland? It's like bitterly cold, you know. And because underneath the ground, underneath the because it was, you know, one of those Queensland buildings with sticks for foundations, and there was nothing built underneath. So you had air coming up your bum from the floor and air coming through the windows. I'll never forget as long as I live. But I sat there, 200 people squashed into this Gompa. I went to every single session, but it did not have a clue. I tried to, I mean, not that I didn't understand Rinpoche's words. I couldn't put together the concept. What's he talking about? I kept thinking, where's the Buddhism, you know? And then Lama Yeshe would come along and I'd sigh with relief, of course. Just thank God it makes sense, you know? But it takes time just because it's medieval. I mean, pre-medieval. No, it's medieval, Tsongkhapa, isn't it? This presentation. And then as you start to understand the Lamrim, you start to see the psychological logic to each of these stages, you know? So given the general view the Buddha is telling us, this is his general view, that we're in la-la land in relation to reality, and that's why we suffer. And then he's discovered that these delusions in the mind that cause us to be in la-la land, they're not at the core of our being. They're adventitious and they can be removed. So once you know that theory, that point, then you know that what's in your mind is the main problem. So the very first, but what's interesting, the very first level of practice, which is, you know, entry level, junior school, which is first scope, the essence of that is abide by the laws of karma. In other words, the essence of that is control your body and speech. So the essence of that is, well, you know, you've got to discipline the servants of your mind. So the essence of why Buddha says don't kill, don't steal, don't lie is because your body and speech, your behavior are driven by these crazy delusions. So is your body and speech when it comes to love and kindness, but that's not our problem. So the very first level of practice he gets us to do junior school, entry level, he doesn't talk about the mind yet. He just says, control the servants of your mind. Don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner. I mean, initially, we just hear it like we did as good Christians or good Muslims. We're going to be sent to hell by God if we do it. That's not Buddha's reason for telling us. Buddha's reason for telling us to not kill and not steal. He says, because, honey, child, they're going to harm you. So, but the essence of it is control your body and speech. The essence of junior school is control your body and speech. Why? Because they're driven by the delusions, and then they cause you to sow seeds in your mind that'll ripen as your future suffering. That's a pretty profound concept. So the energy behind the first level of practice is to protect you from future suffering. Control your body and speech. Now you've harnessed your energy enough to get to high school now, to the middle school, when now you get to the root of the problem, which is that the mind itself gets more subtle. And effectively, in the Four Noble Truths, Lord Buddha is telling us that attachment is the main cause of suffering. Now, we know ego grasping, the root delusion, is the main cause of suffering. But that's too soon. Effectively, this world we live in, it's a desire realm. Desire is equivalent to attachment. The world we live in is actually the product of countless lives of practicing attachment. That's how come we have, penises and vaginas and eyes and ears and ears and noses and all these objects, these sense organs that linked to our mind, the senses, linked to the delusions that crave the sense object, which is the external world. I mean, we created this world. It's the creation of attachment, literally. It's like karmic evolution, it's a product of attachment. So when we begin to understand Buddha's view about what attachment is, it's so primordial. I mean, Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You never begin to understand it. It's so way more subtle than we imagine. But in the Lam Rim, there's no drama there. There's no big go on about it. It just simply says, learn to see the pain this attachment causes you. So, of course, like I said, the actual function of it, this delusion that exaggerates the deliciousness of an object, where it's the expression of what's going on in the mind. And what's going on in the mind is this incredible feeling of dissatisfaction. That's the main energy of attachment. You get born with it. So why? This is the logic. Why do we have dissatisfaction? Why do we have a default assumption that I'm not enough and I don't have enough? Because that's what drives us to look for the cakes and the boys. So the feeling of not having enough is what causes you to dump all your expectations on the cake, and then causes the attachment to exaggerate the cake. So the more you feel you don't have enough, the more fantasy the attachment is, the more grasping, manipulative, controlling, possessing. These are all the function of attachment. But it comes from this dissatisfaction. Well, why? It's very logical. Because if attachment exaggerates something, then let's say you got a $5 note, but you're convinced it's 500, and you've believed it for so long, it even now appears to you as 500. This is the point about attachment. The habit's so deep that it appears to you as 500. So you totally believe it's worth 500. You build up all these expectations about spending 500 and getting 500's worth. And inevitably and naturally, what's going to happen? You'll be disappointed, devastated, upset, angry, blah, blah, because it's not what you thought. That's what attachment is. You don't get what you think you'll get. So we build up eons of this practice. So naturally, you become dissatisfied. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's primordial. You don't have to, your mother doesn't teach you to be dissatisfied. It's just you come into this world with it, and we can see some people have it far more powerfully than others. You can see that. And that's what leads to this really deep attachment of like craving, like being a junkie or an alcoholic or eating all day or whatever, or jumping on girls all day or boys, the deeper, the grosser level of attachment. Terrible dissatisfaction, like being a junkie, quite literally, this terrible vacant sense of literally not being enough and just desperate for the sense objects. That's the grosser level. We're all junkies in one way or another. There's no question. That's the thing about attachment. So the main suffering of it is dissatisfaction. Naturally, it causes you to hanker. Now, this dissatisfaction, bad enough that it's I don't have enough, but when it's the worst one, and this is how it is in the West, it's our worst suffering, is I am not enough. even more that I don't have enough, that I am not enough. This is the word, and that's what we mean by self-hate. We do not think we are enough. Everybody, I don't think I know anyone on the planet who looks in the mirror and is satisfied with how they look. I think that's the most perfect example of dissatisfaction with ourselves, you know. Nobody. What we do is we're not satisfied. So when you're not satisfied, you find fault. That's what it leads to anger. Attachment leads to anger. So dissatisfaction is the thwarted attachment, because you want to feel satisfied, but you're not. You don't have enough. Your body isn't enough. What you are isn't enough. You haven't accomplished enough. It's always a default assumption. So this drives us. We can see the pain of this, and the tragedy is, as Lama Zopa says, I was saying before, it is bad enough that the way I'm giving this example, the way we appear to ourselves, bad enough that it's not accurate. But the worst thing is we believe it's true. This is what keeps us paralyzed in samsara. That's why even if we know we're so stuck in samsara, but you get the habit of not believing, this instinctive assumption that I'm not enough, I didn't get enough, I haven't got enough, I haven't achieved enough. I mean, it's still, even when you argue with it, it doesn't go overnight, but you have to pick it up. And every time you argue with it, it's like an atomic bomb under it. But every time you believe it, you strengthen it, you entrench it, you know. We can see this. So attachment is so much more primordial than we can even imagine, you know. But the thing, I'm saying different things here. One is in general to know your mind well, because as we know from the Buddhist model of the mind, you've got the positive states of mind, the negative states of mind, and forget the other ones, but positive and negative. The neurotic, delusional, exaggerated, distorted misconceptions that are the emotional afflictions, attachment and anger and jealousy, that have the emotional, you know, that are connected to the body. And then you've got your positive qualities, your positive states of mind. They're all there too, but we don't go on about those. We don't believe them. 27 people can tell you're a nice person. You don't believe it. You're hungry to hear it, but you just don't believe it. One person says they don't like you and you believe it totally. So it proves what we think of ourselves. It's really obvious. So the habit is very deep. But to know that they're misconceptions is the important point, is what I'm getting at. Conception is the point, you know, conception. Their thoughts, their opinions, their viewpoints, but they have this massive emotional component. So they're the emotional ones, and they're what we're mainly dealing with in the middle scope, the afflictions, as they call them, and trying to subdue them because the pain of them is so difficult. There's no discussion there very much about there being misconceptions. They don't go on like that there. But that's pretty powerful to understand. So the key one, of course, is in the very first scope, you try not to follow attachment with your body and speech. You know, you don't jump on the wrong partner. You try not to, at least you try not to do the things that harm others, at least that. Buddha doesn't say don't have 14 pieces of cake. He exhorts us very first to not harm others, because that's the heaviest karma. But you get the idea after a while that you'll try and control eating 14 pieces of cake. I mean, you're the beneficiary of this. It's not some moralistic thing. So every time you control your body and your speech, then you control your mind. Then it makes it easier to focus on the mind then. But this is something I think we don't really like in the West. I mean, we don't pay much attention. I found it totally boring when I hear about behaviour. Boring, you know. It's taken me all these years to start to see the benefit of it, controlling your behaviour. Remember Lama Yeshe? He was so kind to me. I remember I was feeling all self-piteous with him one year in London. I remember. I think we'd had a fight. I don't know. I forgot what happened. I'd never fight with Lama. I never fought with Lama. But I remember I was feeling all self-piteous of something that happened. And he was so direct. He said, "There's nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behaviour." And it was so helpful. I can't describe to you. It was like until that moment, there's this feeling that I'm a bad person. But Lama says, "Oh no, it's just your behaviour." It was really a miracle for me. It's just your behaviour. In other words, your heart's fine, but it's how you behave. Uncontrolled speech. I mean, I don't go around punching people, killing people. It's my speech. And that's something. I mean, talk about daily practice. You know, this is the thing with people go on about mindfulness and being Buddhists and practicing and meditating, and that's practice, and you're practicing and it's meditation and blah, blah, blah. I mean, excuse me, I'm going to be rude here. I'm going to be Australian. Bugger meditation. Americans, we talk like that in Australia, okay? Bugger meditation. Control your bloody speech, all right? I swear to you, I mean, you know, we do this meditation, the blessing the speech meditation every time I do it for Thupten Norbu Ling. The more I think about it, the more profound it is. Because if we had control over what comes out of our mouth, 90% of our problems in daily life would not exist. And this is a fact. It's just a fact, you know. But it's so hard for us to hear it because we're so craving to say what we want. In other words, our speech is uncontrolled because our mind is uncontrolled, and we're desperate to be heard by somebody, you know, which is attachment to having a good reputation. So to be able to control our speech, to have good disciplined behavior, is a pretty advanced practice, I tell you. That's a symptom of a really good practitioner, when you can really control your speech. So it's really quite profound, even though it's junior school. We don't like it. We just prefer, oh, I want to meditate. Oh, I want to be mindful. We wonder why nothing ever changes, you know, because we just don't value. We don't value this. I mean, it just sounds so weird to say control your speech. Our view in the West is I'm allowed to say what I like, we say. And why we say that is because we don't think it has consequences. Whereas the Buddha's view of karma is very simple. Every millisecond of what we think and do and say is the process of producing the person we become. So if we have any self-respect at all, and any understanding of Buddhist teachings at this first level, it's for our benefit. He's giving us methods to help us become less neurotic, to help us suffer less. That's really the important point about the wisdom wing, the first scope and second scope. It's solely for your benefit. You are the beneficiary of those practices. Why he tells us not to kill, this is a really crucial point. Killing is definitely a negative action. Why? Because it harms others. That's Buddha's deal. The Christians say it's wrong because God says. Not the Buddha's view at all. It's wrong because people suffer. But the reason Buddha exhorts us not to kill is because it's going to harm you. Because everything you think, do, and say produces the person you become. Once we get this, I tell you, we're going to have some sense of respect. We're going to be able to close our mouths. We will be able to be sad not to control our mouth, you know. Whereas we have this awful nihilistic view in the West that we say it, I'm allowed to say what I like. We say that, I'm allowed. Well, yes, we are allowed. But what we don't see is that it has any impact upon the person we become, which is what Lama Zopa is saying. We don't realize that it plays any role in our lives. And we certainly don't think what goes on in our mind. I mean, we can be sitting there, we think it's okay to have fantasies. And I remember in France at the Institute Vajrayogini there, and there was one therapist who worked with somebody in prison who was a cannibal. Liked to eat. Did he eat his girlfriend? I can't remember the story now. What was it? I can't remember. Oh, that's right. No, another story. There was one. That's right. He ate his girlfriend or something like that. Whatever. But that's not the point here. Sorry, that's the wrong story. The other story. Oh, yeah, but it's about a cannibal. That's right. This woman in Brooklyn. That's right. This woman in Brooklyn got into her husband's computer and discovered he was part of a cannibal site, and they were planning to kill and eat her. Can you imagine her shock? So the lawyer defending the fellow, this is the point now. His whole defense was, but that's only in the mind. They're allowed to have fantasies. They're allowed to think like this. In other words, it has no impact on what you do. I mean, that's quite schizophrenic, you have to admit. But he really was this intelligent lawyer who gave this as a genuine defense. In other words, we really don't think what goes on in our mind has an impact on who we are, not to mention what goes on out our mouth. Even that we don't think, you know. So we're quite weird. It's quite astonishing, really. So I think the other thing too, to answer the question about how to put it into daily life, is to look at the reason why. This is the biggest problem, because we have this sort of blame punishment idea of religious philosophy, And then reasonably, if you're a Christian, this is always quote this, I say it all the time, but it's a profound point, that being a Christian, as my Catholic priest friend said, you know, a sin is doing what God said not to do. That's what makes killing wrong, is because God said. So naturally, if you go against God's will, God being the boss will punish you. And that's the view we have about religion. That's the view we have in the world. And that's why we think if someone doesn't see me do something naughty, we'll think, oh, I got away with that. That's the view we have. I mean, Lamy Ish would say that's schizophrenic. We don't think what we think and do and say produces us. We think it's being seen to be good and then getting rewarded, and being seen to be naughty and then getting punished. I mean, that's quite schizophrenic, but that's how we think. So this idea of the Buddhas, that there's no creator, don't be ridiculous, as His Holiness says, karma is like self-creation, that we literally create ourselves. This can only bring a profound sense of accountability if we start to understand it. And it just takes time because it's so linked to emptiness, you know. When we can get that, we will be grown up. We will be big girls and boys. And we will know we would only want to control our speech for our own sake. We would only want to control our mind for our own sake. We would only want to control our behavior for our own sake. We are the prime beneficiaries of the first and second scopes of Buddha's analysis, Buddha's teachings. This is the simple point. But of course, as Lama Yeshe said, Lama Zopa says, the rats and roaches will have a party because you'll leave them in peace. But the energy behind all of Buddha's instructions, and we can't hear this in the West, is it's for your sake. In fact, we think that sounds selfish. I mean, we're so ridiculous. It's just absurd. It's like thinking that when someone tells you not to eat too much sugar because you might get diabetes, oh, that's selfish. Don't be ridiculous. It's common sense. It's intelligence. No one would call you selfish if you don't eat sugar. Well, that's how we think about spiritual. If you don't kill and lie and steal because you don't want suffering, oh, but that's selfish. I mean, we're really very stupid, you know. And we don't get this. The whole point of Buddha's teachings in the first and second scopes is for one's own sake. That's the whole point. I mean, for God's sake, it's the whole point. Why he says don't kill is because Robina, honey child, you'll put imprints in your mind that'll cause you to have terrible future suffering. And you know you don't want suffering. That's what's behind his exhorting us not to do. That's what's behind all the vows. We are the beneficiary. Even when we get to the Bodhisattva path, the vows are still what they call vows of refraining from harming. But the radical difference with the Bodhisattva vows is that they're now still don't do this and don't do that, but they're now to help you help others. They're much more radical. But you've first got to know how to help yourself. And how you help yourself is by controlling your body, your speech, and your mind. That's the method. And that's what's interesting. That's how you take care of yourself. I mean, we talk a lot in the West about, you know, self-compassion. Well, that's self-compassion. It's surprising to us because we think that means having a massage and a relax. There's nothing wrong with having a massage and a relax. Please do it. But the real point is, you know, practicing on your body, speech, and mind, which is what spiritual practice is. Then you can practice compassion on the basis of that. Oh, look, the thunder's coming. Must be a storm coming tonight. So anyway, I'm raving on as usual for 45 minutes. A few thoughts here. So I would like you to ask me some questions.
Venerable?
Yeah.
Alison?
Good. Go on, Alison.
I have a question about love.
Where are you? Good, Alison.
Yep.
Good, go on.
So I have a husband, and my question is.
Well done. I'm happy for you. Maybe.
My question is: there's love with the wish, may you be happy. Is the love that I label romantic, wanting to kiss him, cuddle him, do other things with him, purely just attachment love, if you know what I mean?
I understand.
Not,
I do.
You know, the different levels of love you feel for different people. Is it just attachment you're following?
Exactly, darling. Okay. Well, put it like this, Alison. Put it like this. and this is really it'll give you the answer in a back to front way. If you were to meet a bodhisattva, okay, and you understand what a bodhisattva is, a person who's given up, or you understand what I'm talking about? A person who's, let's say, a person who's even realized emptiness and has gone beyond attachment, aversion, jealousy, depression, anxiety. If you can try and imagine such a person, are you hearing me?
Yep.
Can you imagine that kind of person?
Yes.
Now, that person, if they're in a human body, they would have, they've chosen to be in the human body, because by that point they don't need bloody bodies, but they've chosen out of compassion for others to be born as a human. And maybe they chose to be a nice woman and they go get married and have babies. That's completely possible. But what you've got to understand is they will also have they will be energized by that beautiful husband, but they will only have love. They will only have kindness. They will only have compassion. They will not have attachment. They can't have, it's gone. So you could argue that person also would love everybody in exactly the same way, but they wouldn't jump on everybody sexually. They would, because they've got a human body and they've chosen to be a wife, and they're going to have a husband, that means they jump into bed together and have babies. That will only be expressed there, but it's driven not by their craving and their desperate need for that, which is what we have. It's driven by their wish to be of benefit to others. They will still enjoy the sex. They'll have the best sex in the world because there's no attachment, there's no misery, but they don't turn into a frozen nothing because there's no attachment. It's hard to comprehend that. Attachment is emotional hunger that is coming from feeling we're not enough. And one of the most powerful attachments to contact with the object of attachment is, as we know, is the object of tactile object, which is called sexual. That's the most intense one because it triggers the most intense pleasure. But it comes not from love and compassion. So you could argue, even if you give up attachment to your husband, you find him fat and ugly and boring, but out of your incredible kindness, you might have sex with him and get some pleasure because you're so loving and kind. Are you with me? Alison, looks like you didn't listen to what I said. You can't hear it. Alison, couldn't you hear what I'm saying? We can't hear you, Alison. Your voice is gone. Alison, now your voice, your picture's gone. Alison's gone away. Wait till she comes back. Someone else there? I'll talk to you when you come back, Alison. Anybody else? Did anybody? Go on. When she comes back, we'll talk. Anybody else have questions? This is the part. Okay, let me talk more about this. This is quite shocking. This does not exist in Western psychology. It sounds like mental illness. We, in the Western psychological model, we give equal status to what we call attachment and craving and desire and love and compassion and anger and jealousy. We would never posit a possibility. I'll be with you in a minute. Listen, Alison, you can hear me? Alison? Turn your thing off so I can hear you.
Yes, sorry, Venerable. I lost my sound there.
Okay, so did you hear what I was talking about? And I'm just about to say that this is impossible to understand using the Western psychological model, the neuroscientific model. It sounds like mental illness to think you'd have no attachment, no anger, no jealousy, but this is Buddha's entire point. So of course it's for us at the moment. Now, if in your relationship, love and compassion and kindness and generosity predominate, then you'll be okay. But if it's mainly attachment, you'll be upset when your attachment doesn't get what it wants. You'll get angry easily. You get jealous easily. You'll fight easily. You know what I'm saying? All the pain and suffering. So of course it's massively attached. And normally that's why a person gives up a relationship, because you're bored by him. You want someone else to get you all excited now. So of course it's attachment, darling. But we have to distinguish between the two of them. Yeah. That's the point. The virtues are expressing for others. They're connected to others. They're valid. They make you happy. They make others happy. They're more reasonable. But these other ones, so with attachment in that kind of relationship, you have to learn to be more wise and more skillful. And anyway, you understand, but we have to know our mind well.
Thank you.
Okay. What else, people? Any questions there, Amy, in the little box, in the chat box?
Yes, we just have one question here from Tanya. Tanya is asking, can we say that people are attached to their suffering?
Well, I think technically speaking, you would argue that attachment only wants a nice thing. Attachment exaggerates the niceness of something. So it's really a contradiction in terms, but you can say we're very we're attached to being right. Maybe we're attached to this view of I, and so we're attached to our habits, which end up causing us suffering. You'd certainly put that way, that for sure. I mean, a person who's, let's say, a simple example of a person, let's say, is attached to food, you know, and can't stop eating. You could argue they're attached to their suffering. No, you're attached to the food, and it's impossible, and it's really hard to say no to it. And then you believe you can't change. You're stuck in this groove, and then you identify yourself, and then you have pity for yourself. So it's a mixture of things, you know. But technically, attachment is for something that you think is nice, you know. So it's the whole scenario, I think, for sure. So you can very say, because the habits are so strong, we're very caught up in our suffering, and we're very caught up in and then we identify with ourselves as being that kind of person. You know, you could say that for sure, I'd say. I would say so. I mean, in a bit, you could argue we're, like I joke and I say, I think we even say it, we're addicted to misery. It's true. The way we are with our attachment and our suffering, we run to misery. I mean, you know, the default, we run to the negative story. We run to the misery. It's true. But it's sort of like we don't notice it's suffering. This is the point. We don't notice it's suffering, you know, because the suffering is so subtle. We don't notice it. I think it's like that, perhaps. What else, people? Any questions, please?
There's no more questions in the chat at the moment.
Yes, okay, good.
Oh.
Hello, Maria, darling. Maria,
Venerable Robina, I've had situations where in discussions with various family members, people in general, and I find that in a conversation, and I can't think of any particular circumstance, but I just have to zip it and not say anything. But I also feel like I'm actually being a bit phony. It's kind of a weird.
In what way? I know, Maria, but I think, see, Maria, darling, I think it totally depends on the person. You can't even speak generally about this. Each individual person and each individual situation is so different that you know, you can be really close to one person in one way and talk openly, but when it comes to another topic, you literally can't open your mouth. So it's not a question of being phony, it's a question of being intelligent.
Okay.
I mean, you have to know the person well enough. I mean, I can see it with my sisters. I love all my. We talk to each other. We don't fight. We don't talk behind backs. We don't talk about. And this is the key point. We do not talk about things we disagree with. Now, I know their views about life are completely different from mine. I know it with absolute certainty. So we literally never go there. That's zipping my lip. Of course it is.
Yeah.
And that's a very sensible thing to do. That's being wise, I'd say, and being compassionate to others. I mean, the idea of, are you understanding me?
Yes, absolutely. I just sort of have this feeling that I'm actually almost lying to myself.
Well, you need to give an example, though, Maria.
Yeah,
give me a little scenario.
I can't think of a scenario right now, but
maybe you got to look at, perhaps, you know, maybe you got to look at a particular time when maybe you're feeling you're a bit afraid to say something. That could be the uncomfortable feeling, that maybe you should be saying something, but you're afraid to say it. That's different.
Yeah.
You got to know yourself. Sometimes we've got to risk saying things for a good reason. We've got to be wise, Maria, because every person, every situation is really quite different, you know.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Absolutely. And especially your situation with your family, because my family's crazy. My family's crazy.
Your family what? They all fight, you mean, shout and yell.
They fight and yell and scream. There was a big fight last week over my cousin's son delivering mail to their place, and his partner has her kids delivering mail, but she's not allowed to have her kids deliver mail, but he's allowed to have hers.
Oh my God, I mean,
it went crazy. They were screaming at each other. And we got up and walked out. Crazy.
I mean, it's just utter absurd, you know. And that's the thing that's I'm talking about, like I mentioned about my family, we're not saints, but because over all these years we really got this conscious decision not to go in that, because we used to fight and yell. It's the bonus, which I wouldn't have expected, I hadn't thought of it, is that because there's not that anguish and that forgiving all the time and tenterhooks, then there's space to actually say positive things, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy because each one of us is quite different, you know. But it's a really, to make that, when you have control over the mouth, it's a pretty profound practice, I tell you. I mean, some people naturally have that and they're very admirable. And indeed, you could also say, Maria, some people need to speak more. That's a different discussion again. You know, but when it comes to families and organizations or talking behind backs, that's the worst one. That's the most terrible one, you know, you can see. But yeah, no, it's interesting. It's just, I mean, and learning to control our speech, it is controlling the speech, but it also implies a certain level of spiritual maturity. It says speech comes before mind, but really it's only when you control your mind you can control your speech, you know. So it's like it's catch-22 a bit, but all we can do is at least try. The very most we can do is with other people, at least don't say the words. And that's been the hardest practice in my life, to the part where I've got into trouble so much, you know, uncontrolled speech, like Lama pointed out. Nothing wrong with your heart, dear, just your behavior. Look, the other interesting point there, extra point, is you get very caught up in this self-pity view. I'd have this self-pity view of myself. Well, I'm really mean well, and people aren't fair, and people criticize me, and people think I'm being angry, and I'm not really being angry. It was like very self-pity, you know. I don't just shut up and grow up and just control my bloody mouth and be done with it, you know. Don't blame everybody else. You understand?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, what else, people?
Venerable Robina, there's a question here from Kevin. Kevin's asking, can you discuss the attachment to reputation and the desire to be liked?
Absolutely. You know, I think this one, it takes a while to see it because it's much subtler than attachment to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know. Oh, wow, there's a storm coming. But it's really the most primordial attachment. And to say it's called attachment to reputation sounds almost rather funny. You laugh at it, you know, but the most simple way of putting it is it's attachment to being liked. And I think it's since we are born. It's not joking. We're born with, we come programmed with these delusions. And so the most primordial attachment is it's coming from, because this is background. The point about, they say, as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, from the very positing of an I, of a concrete solid I, that implies the positing of other. So it sounds so cosmic to us to think, well, what else is there? I mean, our entire psychological model of the universe, the modern world, is based on this view of very definite separate I's. And in fact, the way we think in our culture psychologically, we become socialized as reasonable beings by connecting with others. So it's reinforcing this exact view, the Buddhist view. So when Lama Yeshe says, when you've realized emptiness, when you've cut the delusion that believes in a separate I, you absolutely cut attachment, you've cut aversion. And this is the point that sounds so abstract for us. You literally no longer have a sense of a separate I. When you really got the realizations and you're highly advanced, it's as if your I is as big as the universe, where there's no longer this sense of a neurotic I that by definition feels needy. Having a separate I is already a feeling of not being enough. So then the deepest feeling of not being enough is we don't value who we are. So we've been adjusting our behavior since we're born, probably. We've been adjusting our behavior to what suits the person in front of us. So when we were a little girl and I kicked my legs and mummy laughed at me, even right then as a baby, my neediness to be seen and approved of just got what it wanted. So the next day I kick and I giggle and then she hits me. No wonder you get confused, because you get all confused signs from your crazy mum, you know. So this attachment to being needed and seen is actually because we don't think we are valid. This is the irony of ego. We have no sense of a proper self. It's really quite a mental illness. And the stronger this attachment to being seen and heard and liked by others is the more strong we suffer, and the more disconnected we are from ourselves. It's really quite a deep, serious mental illness. But levels of it we just consider to be normal in our culture. So, I mean, it's really hard to see it, though. Since we're born, we've had it. So it's a constant. So then depending on our personality, You know, if you're sort of like a more peaceful person, your mummy's little helper, you're a good girl, put it that way, then that's a really nice thing to be mummy's little helper, to be a peaceful person and to help other people. But when there's a strong, your identity of yourself as being that kind of person, then you are adjusting what you're saying and doing all the time to make sure you continue to be seen as a nice girl. So you're always being saying yes, and then you wonder why you get treated like a doormat, you know, because it's coming from a place of weakness. Attachment is a place of weakness. And then you think you're being so nice, you say yes to everybody, you have an identity of yourself as being a helper, and you praise yourself for being a helper, and then you want people to need you, and then when they abuse you because you're weak, you wonder why, you know. That's one example. So you could argue, like, I mean, a person like me who got angry and shout and yell, always seemed to make trouble. I never thought of I didn't think I cared what people thought of me, but I cared terribly, you know. And then I developed this view of myself as this troublemaker and prided myself on being a troublemaker and kind of like, well, screw other people. But it was mainly feeling hurt because no one loved me. So in the end, we've all got this one. Depends on the way we express it, you know. It's a very deep primordial one. And if you look into your own mind all the time, we're always talking to somebody. You know, you have an experience, you're telling someone. Something bad happens, you want to tell somebody, you want to call somebody, you want to rush in and tell your hubby or ring somebody, because we don't validate what we think, and we don't validate our own experiences. We have to have another person. We call it sharing. Okay. We need another person to say, wow, Robina. So we call it sharing. And I'm not saying it's not good to have friends. I'm not saying it's not good to talk to people. I'm not saying it's not good to have a therapist. We need that. But eventually we don't. Eventually we become our own therapist. We can validate ourselves. And then the sharing we will do will be based on compassion. Our sharing now is completely based on neediness. It's completely based on the craving to be heard by others. Why? Because we can't hear ourselves. That's attachment to reputation, our deepest attachment. It's the hardest one to go. They say it's the closest to ego grasping. It's the closest to, you know, to the whole sense of I. It's the subtlest attachment of all. They say it's like the yogis in the mountains who've given up the grosser attachments, are still thinking of what the people in the village are thinking about them. And this is a constant conversation in our mind. We're always talking to ourselves about what people think of us, or talking to ourselves about what people should think of us, or what they ought to think of us, if only this, and telling a person, and hearing what a person's saying, and watching this witness talking all the time. This is this constant need to be seen and heard and validated. And the stronger that is, the less valid we feel, the more uncertain. In fact, you know, we don't even know what we feel, especially if you come in, like say, you know, especially in some cultures. I mean, our culture is more easygoing now, you know, but like I call it the tyranny of families, when it's just the family and the whole business of what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to act. And if you do this, you can't do that because it'll be seen as bad. And we're driven by this. And therefore in our whole lives, we're driven by being afraid to we call it, oh, I don't want to upset people. No, you don't want them to dislike you. So it's really and it takes time to dig deep and to have the courage. It doesn't just mean you go out and do and say what you like. That's not the opposite. It's like there's lovely saying in the West, becoming your own person, you know. So you have the courage to say and do what you think is most beneficial, even if the whole world turns against you. You know, but we don't even know what we want. Even if we are doing reasonably well in our lives, you know, it's like we're too scared to make difficult decisions. Like, you know, let's say I've got a husband and 5 kids, and Amy rings me up and says, oh, the Dalai Lama is giving this amazing teaching in Paris next week. We must go. Would you like to come? Well, the first thing I'll say, oh, no, not possible, Amy, not possible. And what I'm thinking is the hubby won't approve, the kids won't approve, I can't do that, the work won't approve, I can't get time off. Oh, it'll be seen as bad. My mother will think I'm terrible, I'm being selfish. All this is in like 1 millisecond. No, not possible, I'll say. So I just cut myself up at the knees, you know. So we're even too scared to make the difficult decisions. We're scared to consider that might be a good idea. Let's see if it's possible, you know, because we're worried about what people think of us. It's just, we mightn't think we worry about it, but it's just so deep, so automatic. I mean, you're driving in the car on the freeway and some bloke toots his horn. Why do you think you get upset? We'll say it's natural. Yeah, of course it's natural, but a person just disapproved of you. And it's a bloody stranger, people. It's a stranger just disapproved of you, and we get upset. A stranger disapproved of us. We freak out. We have a panic attack. That's attachment to being seen and heard as a good girl. So what do you think? Whoever asked that question. Who was it again?
That's Kevin.
What do you think, Kevin? Is that good enough for you? Food for thought? Kevin?
As always, Venerable Robina, it's wonderful food for thought. Practice is the hard part. I get it in the brain. Right. I have to get it in the heart.
That's right. That's right. So catching it, it's just catching it. And at certain points, catching it, you know, catching it. It just, but I mean, to hear that it's there is very, so we can look forward to it as well. I mean, it really, by the time we've got rid of we've controlled our body and speech, junior school, you go to the high school, you start to change your mind, you lessen attachment. And even in this process, you're becoming more content, less separate, less neurotic, more courageous. Then you add bodhicitta to it, then you realize emptiness. And so it's a gradual, slow process. And once we understand the process, we can enjoy the process, and we just keep getting better. You know, we keep getting better at it, one step at a time.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Yes. No, Kevin, definitely. Who else, people? Some other thoughts?
Yes, there's a question from Rosemary. Rosemary is asking about looking at daily headlines and seeing what's going on with Vladimir Putin and what he's in charge of. And can you help me think of him as having a good heart but problematic behaviour?
Maybe not. Maybe his heart's no good either. I don't know. Okay, so let's look at that. I think, you know, this is where if you understand the stages of practice, I can't stress this enough, but I know it took me time to understand it. The stages of practice, which is the way the Lam Rim structures everything. The first level of practice, and I like to call it the wisdom wing, which is junior school and high school, the first and second scopes of the Lam Rim. As I said before, it's all about what's beneficial to help you not lose the plot, not kill, not steal, not lie, not harm yourself now and in the future. So that's the practice of controlling your body, your speech, and your mind. So that's the wisdom wing. So that's one way to see the lenses, there's one lens to see the world through. Now, the other one is the compassion wing, which is necessarily more advanced. So let's just say you're using the wisdom wing in this particular occasion to interpret the world. So you read the news, and there's Mr. Putin. So this is where how you would apply the wisdom wing. You would do the analysis of oh my God, look at this is due to karma. Mr. Putin, due to past karma, has this very strong tendency, this arrogance, this harming, the thing to kill, running a country, running a war. Look at the terrible, so the karma that he created to become this person. And now look at the terrible karma he's creating by you know, spearheading a war, having all his Russian people go out and kill the Ukrainians, blah, blah, blah. And then the karma of all the suffering boys who are doing the killing. And then you look at the karma of the Ukrainians being killed because, you know, they've killed in the past. You use the analysis you're using for yourself, which is karma, to interpret other people. And then you see, well, what's driving all that is their delusions, their anger, their attachment. And then you go, thank you for showing me how not to be. That's how you interpret the world for your benefit from the wisdom wing point of view. Then, now you can put your compassion glasses on. And you can say, oh my God, look at the harm they're doing to themselves. Look at the harm Mr. Putin is doing to himself. Look at the poor suffering people, the harm they're doing to each other and to themselves. And think of and you have incredible compassion because of their ignorance. Then if you have these views, you get stronger and stronger in your own practice. You won't lose the plot and you won't get depressed. And you will think, all I can do is keep moving, practice and never give up. That's the answer, I promise. Does that help?
Thank you, Venerable Robina. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
We've got to have those in for ourselves. That's the whole point. If we don't apply karma and the delusions to ourselves, then we're in trouble, you know, and then it's confusing. And also, as in a way you question, you know, you framed the question, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Putin has got Buddha nature. That's true.
Yeah.
But his heart very well right now might not be pure. He might be totally driven by the delusions, which is exactly what he's expressing. So, but all the reason again to realize karma and all the reason to have compassion for him. That's the point. So it's not a question of making everyone, oh, they all mean well. That's naive. No.
Yes.
Some people are really very, very, very deluded. Now, also the other point is we're not clairvoyant. We can't see. So don't get too caught up in it. But the general one is applying the teachings on karma and the delusions is you see the world, you see the suffering that they're causing to themselves, and you go, then this is how I find. Thank you for showing me how not. It's like a learning. It's like you're learning to be an oncologist, and you get your latest patient, and you start digging into their disgusting cancer, and you learn. You're delighted because you want to learn about the cancer. It's all grist for the mill for you. It's the same here. You want to understand samsara. You want to understand suffering. So you look at the world and you go, it's like a workshop. You go, oh my God, look at it. And it reinforces your own renunciation. It reinforces your own wish to give the bloody thing up, not just get upset and confused. You understand?
Yeah.
And then you have compassion, because we're all in the same boat. That's the killer, you know. And then you think, I must never give up working on myself so I can continue to become a Buddha one day so I can be of benefit. That keeps us going. Otherwise, we'll all lose the plot. We'll all go crazy, you know. You understand?
Thank you, Venerable Robina. Terrific.
Good time. What else? We've got 15 more minutes, people. Come on.
There's another question here. Yeah, another question here, Venerable Robina, from Rosie.
Rosie.
Rosie says, would you explain the attachment to our and others' gender, i.e. male versus female, as it's so prevalent in the
Okay. Is what?
What's
the end of the question?
It's so prevalent in the world, and Rosie says it's difficult to find the selflessness in that at present.
No, I know, it's very fascinating, isn't it? And now these days, because of new genders we're creating, and by, you know, and changing our genders, and I mean, it's very and it's not trying to be, this is not being political. I'm trying to analyze it from the perspective, Buddha's perspective. The fact of the matter is, you know, we all identify ourselves in some way, don't we? So forget the gender one, but we can see we identify ourselves in terms of what we do. We identify ourselves as mummy's little helper. We identify ourselves as a carpenter. We identify ourselves as fat or thin or angry. We have so many ways that we grab onto one aspect of ourself and then label the whole of ourself in those terms, isn't it? Now, I'm not trying to be controversial here. I'm really not, but I try to analyze it like this is what I'm trying to do being a Buddhist. That when I think of the way we are, and due to the, I mean, with the gender one, I mean, if we all had no clothes on and no hair, okay, some people have lumps on their chest and some people have a couple of lumps down between their legs. That's about it, isn't it? I mean, roughly speaking. So when you strip away all the packaging, all the labels, all the bits and pieces that we use to identify ourselves with, you know, what is there? This humanity. And I'm not trying to be naive here. It doesn't mean we don't have, so in other words, we have strong attachment. Don't be criticized, but this is not criticizing, it's a fact. We have strong attachment to identifying ourselves in certain ways. And then what happens is you're born in this life. So of course, if you don't have the view of karma, you somehow think you didn't ask to get born and someone else made you a girl, whereas really you feel like a boy. Now, I'm not saying that's not true. People who do change their gender, it's because they do feel like a girl, but they've got a boy's gender, boy's organs. That's a fact. This is not criticizing. This is a fact. But where does all that come from? It's because we're dissatisfied, and it comes from our past attachment. That's not being rude. Go ahead and become a girl if you think it'll make you happy. I'm not criticizing. Go ahead and become a carpenter if you can help people that way. Go ahead and, you know, become a homosexual or a heterosexual, whatever you want. But this is where, if it's driven by attachment, and if it's only driven by attachment, and then the other one is not being rude either, because in the world these days, it's sort of not too bad to be a homosexual. You can get married, and it's talked about in public. You can be a lesbian, whereas once you would have been hanged for it. So of course you had to keep it hidden, and then you felt stressed because no one approved of you. And look at this painful suffering that you would have had. But now that's happening with different things called, now I'm a non-binary, and I'm this gender, and I'm that gender. But look at the deepest attachment behind all of it. We want to be approved of. We want to be approved of. This is the point. If we were truly content with who we are, we would change our gender and we'd be content with it. We'd change our boyfriend and we'd be content. We would change our breasts and we'd change our clothing or get a new hat or a new profession. If, that's fine to do that. But when we're distressed about it, it's because of attachment. This is not being rude. It's just Buddha's analysis. And it is due to karma. You've got a karmic, let's say you're born in a country where you can't ever be a carpenter, but you've got a strong tendency to be a carpenter. You will be miserable because you can't find carpentry. Well, if you've got a strong tendency to be a homosexual, but you never meet a boy, of course you'll be upset. If you've got a strong tendency to want money, but can never find money, you'll always be upset. It's because of attachment. So the bottom line is, if you're upset, it's because of attachment. That's the Buddha's analysis. If you're upset, it's because of attachment. Upset's a polite word for anger. All this is not a criticism. It's pointing out this is why we suffer. This is why we suffer. So saying this doesn't mean you give up all the conventions. No, you've got a convention of being a boy, a girl, a transgender, whatever you want to call yourself, a carpenter, tall, short, fat, thin. Have those labels. We are those labels. They're relative truths. And if you want to change them because you think you can be happier and then try to be more beneficial, then go ahead and try it out, But mostly it's driven by attachment, constant dissatisfaction, constant stress, It's a huge one, isn't it? And if we just look at even male, female, the classic one of having a penis and a vagina, this is from eons and eons. The Buddhists use eons and eons of attachment. We've literally created the cause to have penises and vaginas and eyes and ears and therefore to crave each other, And now we're not satisfied with that, so we have to go upside down with two people, another person. Some people like dogs now, some people like, it's just that we're never satisfied. We're never satisfied. We're never satisfied. We're never satisfied. So it just brings more and more distress, more and more attachment, life after life after life. This is not being against transgender. It's not being against anybody. It's just trying to see the suffering cause of why we're like this, why we're more and more dissatisfied. So we have to keep creating new and more and more things to be satisfied. And when we can see when it's really driven by attachment, no matter what you get, you'll never be satisfied. So we have to learn on the one hand to find the method to be a useful human being and then learn to be satisfied. And the other point about being satisfied, this interesting point in our culture, being satisfied, we think it's being complacent. No, it's being fulfilled. Then you go to the next level. So my feeling is it's sort of like when you learn music and you pass grade 1. Oh, I'm only in grade 1. And you feel you've got to be dissatisfied to be driven to go to grade 2. No, you delight that you've got to grade 1. Now you can't wait to get to grade 2. So it's a joy that drives you to do more, not dissatisfaction. That's different. But if you're always dissatisfied, you'll get to grade 997, you'll still be miserable. That's the catch-22 of attachment. You'll never get there. But there's two things. One is attached to the way we define ourselves, and the other one is attached. We want people to approve of us. This is why they're suffering. We want people to approve of us, And then when mummy and daddy don't, but we have a mental breakdown, of course, and the world doesn't. And this can be real suffering. Little people get killed and put on the stake because you're not the right thing, blah blah. Anyway, I hope that helps. Bit of thought, food for thought. Anyway, I think I'm non-binary. That's what I've decided. Most monks and nuns are non-binary, actually. We even look the same, except when people look at my chest, they realize I'm not a he. They always call me a he when they see my head, and they go below the neck, they realize I'm a girl, so they have to change it. They're embarrassed. But as you get older, I think I'm a bit of a non-binary, I'd say. Girl, boy, I wouldn't know the difference. I would not know the difference, I promise. Anyway, that's just my comment. Anyone else? Nothing else? Food for thought? Look, it's time to go nearly. 10 minutes, 9 minutes. Anybody want to argue with me what I said? Would it sound naughty? Were you upset by was someone upset with what I said? So I know one person I knew, I always forget if it's a he or a she, who became a she or a he, I can't remember, but really upset and thought I was criticizing transgenders when I said about attachment. But it's the common disease of everything. It governs everything. Why we suffer. How we identify ourselves. It's very powerful, isn't it? That's the thing I learned when I first heard the teachings. I first heard Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe teaching. And I'd been a radical feminist at the time. I'd been a really radical feminist. That was my identity, you know. It was my identity. In fact, when I did, were you there? You weren't there, Peter, were you? Were you there, Peter, at Lama Yeshe's Chenrezig course in 1976 at Chenrezig? You were there. Oh, that was my first course. And I remember I decided to do the Chenrezig. We had the choice to do the Tara retreat. After the Lam Rim course, we had the choice to do the Tara retreat, which was not Lama Yeshe, or the Chenrezig retreat. And I love Lama Yeshe, in spite of myself. I've been a radical feminist. And I did the Chenrezig retreat. But the whole month we did the retreat, I didn't want to visualize Chenrezig as male. I visualized him as female. It was the whole time. It was very nice. I remember that. But I love Lama Yeshe. I couldn't help but love Lama Yeshe. And Lama used to joke, and he said, "You people think I'm female." Because his reincarnation was he was an abbess in the past life. Anyway, blah, blah. No, but I remember the teachings. I realized after hearing the teachings about karma that our mind, which is what we really are, the body just this bloody package. It's got some qualities, but our mind is not even male or female. That's the point about it. Our nature has got nothing to do with male or female or anything else, or carpenter, or good or bad, or, you know, musician. They're just temporary labels we have a connection with. So we're going to use those labels, use those things to identify with, make them useful, make them based on compassion. Otherwise, it's a disaster. It's our mind, it's not male or female, you know, not non-binary, not any of those things. It's finally a Buddha mind. What else, people?
Venerable Robina, Rebecca has asked, do you have a simple way to explain or introduce Buddhism to toddlers and young children?
Well, Rebecca, it also does depend on the person, but I think, you know, there's so many approaches. I think some kids, you know, really like the idea of the pictures and Buddhas and looking at pictures and having a picture of Tara looking like a princess. Some people like the idea of little prayers and mantras. Some kids like you know, I mean, the teachings about things change, the things about compassion, they're really helpful. But you've got to know the kid, I think. You've got to know the person's mind and their tendencies. Some are more tending towards compassion and forgiveness and being kind. Some people are more tending towards seeing their own mind and their own thought processes. So I think knowing more their tendencies first, you know, and then, yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's no one answer. I don't think there really isn't. It really, I mean, compassion is a big one for kids, especially when it comes to animals and creatures. You know, I think that's one of the most powerful things, maybe starting with animals and the little creatures and the little the flies and the bugs, to not harm them because they want to be happy as well. That's something everyone can pick up, I think. That's a really good starting point. At least attempt not to harm, and that's, I mean, again, you see, that's behavior. Try and think behavior. Don't kill the bug. Don't shout at your sister. It's a hard one. At least don't say the words. I mean, that you know, is maybe, it's difficult, but that's something possibly. But I think it depends on the child's character. Some kids love the Buddhas, love drawing the Buddhas, you know. Some kids like meditating. They can sit for 5 minutes and have a little visualization. Depends on the nature. I really think so. What do you think, Rebecca? Does that make sense? Well, I think it's time to go. 5 minutes, people. So I think the one, good, Rebecca, that's great, darling. So I think the thing is just to keep listening to the teachings. That really is important. You've got to keep listening to the teachings. Keeps feeding, you know. It's like feeding. It's like putting petrol in the petrol tank. Then when it comes to the surface in your daily life, you know, something you'll go, oh, that's right, I remember that. Because the words are the tip of the iceberg, but as you hear them more, they start to taste. You taste them, you know. So listening to the teachings is a stepping stone to experiencing the teachings. If you never hear the teachings, you can get very stuck in what you think Buddhism is, and you go up a garden path, you know. So it's really a good practice just to listen, go to a Zoom class, read a book, and then it feeds what you know already, and it strengthens what you know, and it gives you new things. I think that's a really powerful way. Then you don't get bored. You don't get bored, you know. That's the piece of information I find very important. I mean, you can see it. Every time we hear this stuff, another little box gets ticked, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Every time you say it, you hear it a bit deeper. I think it's very important. All right, you people, time to go. Jason, Amy.
Thank you, Venerable
Where's
Robina.
Jason? Where's Jason? He's in Mexico with Lama Ursula, is he?
He is, yes, on retreat. Yeah.
Good, I'm very happy. I'm great. That's great. So you people, I'm happy to see you all. And I'm sorry if you were in Sydney in 2 weeks ago. I was in 2 in the morning. It was in Istanbul and I forgot. But what you should do is, Amy's very sensible. She rings me. I was down by the river, so I had to run back because Amy rang me, you see. So if they'd rung me in Istanbul, if you'd had my phone number in Sydney, they should have rung me. I don't know why Christina didn't do it. Because I mean, I had meant to get up at 2 in the morning, but I forgot. But Istanbul was very nice. I'd never been to Turkey before. It was very wonderful. Lovely people there. Had a very nice time. Okay, people.
Thank you, Venerable
Goodbye.
Robina. Can we offer quick
Better give up.
declaration?
Better give up. Yeah, no, it's enough.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Just think within an hour and a half, all these thoughts we've had, the seeds have gone in, they won't go astray. Nourish these seeds from this second forward. Nourish these seeds by practicing every day and be happy and live a long life and never give up. That's it. Okay. Bye, darling.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Venerable.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Robina.
Thank you so much, Robina.